In April 1945, a British engineering unit encounters an armored hull in Germany with a mass exceeding 100 tons. The vehicle has no engine, no turret, no gun. It stands on open ground, uncamouflaged, without signs of combat. Along the sides are mounting points for a suspension system that is not fully installed. Inside, the hull is empty, without internal equipment. There are no demolition charges. No nearby documentation. The report identifies it as the chassis of an experimental tank, designation E-100. Its parameters do not match standard German armored vehicles. The suspension differs from serial designs. The projected weight exceeds the load capacity of most bridges in the region. At the same time, no indications of preparation for combat use are recorded. The vehicle is not guarded, not evacuated, not destroyed. During the same period, other heavy vehicles are blown up or abandoned due to lack of fuel. This hull is left intact. It is not concealed. It is not being completed. British officers record no combat deployment. No trials. No orders to continue work. Weeks later, the hull is loaded onto a transporter and removed from German territory. The documents do not state why this is done. The designation E-100 appeared in German armored vehicle paperwork during the later phase of the war, within a set of development files associated with the Versuchskonstruktionen and program administered under the authority of the Heereswaffenamt. The program was structured around standardized components and weight classes, with numerical identifiers assigned to proposed vehicles ranging from light to super heavy categories. The E-100 belonged to the heaviest category, with a projected combat weight exceeding that of existing armored vehicles in service. Correspondence circulating among offices responsible for armored development described the vehicle as a simplified alternative to previously authorized heavy designs, with emphasis placed on reduction of manufacturing complexity and consolidation of parts. The administrative responsibility for the E-100 project was transferred to Adlerwerk in Frankfurt am Main. Factory memoranda and allocation orders indicated that the firm was to undertake the construction of a single prototype chassis. The work was assigned low priority compared to vehicles already entering serial production. Material allocations reflected this status. Steel deliveries, machine time, and skilled labor were issued irregularly, and project schedules were repeatedly adjusted in response to broader production demands. By late 1943, documentation shows that the E-100 project remained confined to drawings, partial component fabrication, and planning of assembly procedures. Technical descriptions circulated internally outlined a hull constructed of rolled armor plates, with thickness values comparable to other heavy vehicles under development. Suspension arrangements were described using externally mounted coil springs rather than the torsion bar systems employed in earlier designs. This approach was selected to reduce the number of precision-machined components and to permit easier access during maintenance. Wheel assemblies were to be arranged in paired bogies, bolted to the hull sides. Drive sprockets and idler wheels were to follow existing patterns used in heavy armored vehicles, adjusted for increased load. No turret construction was initiated as part of the Adlerwerk assignment. Files indicated that turret responsibility remained unresolved and that no finalized decision had been issued regarding armament. References were made to possible use of existing heavy turrets or to the adaptation of new designs then under consideration by Krupp. These references remained provisional. No tooling orders or fabrication schedules for turret components were recorded in the Adlerwerk documentation. During 1944, the dispersal of industrial activity accelerated. Orders from the Armaments Ministry directed that critical manufacturing tasks be relocated away from major urban centers. Adlerwerk received instructions to move the incomplete E-100 hull and associated components to a secondary site. Transport records and internal correspondence indicate that the chassis was transferred to an area near Paderborn, where existing military facilities offered space for storage and limited assembly work. The site was used primarily for vehicle training and testing activities, with some workshop capacity available. By the time of relocation, the E-100 existed as an incomplete hull with suspension components partially installed. Engine installation had not taken place. No transmission unit was mounted. Internal fittings remained absent. The hull interior showed only basic structural elements and mounting points. The vehicle was not capable of movement under its own power. Reports noted that the hull rested on its suspension without tracks fitted. Track links designated for the vehicle were not present at the site. Throughout the latter half of 1944 and early 1945, the situation in the region deteriorated as military operations approached. Records from local commands document increased movement of units through the area and the presence of damaged or abandoned equipment. The E-100 hull remained stationary. No further assembly activity was recorded. Requests for continuation of work did not result in material deliveries. Communications from central offices emphasized completion of existing operational vehicles over experimental projects. In March 1945, British forces advanced into the Paderborn area as part of ongoing operations in western Germany. Intelligence units accompanied combat formations with instructions to locate and secure technical material of interest. Standing directives issued by the British War Office established procedures for identifying experimental equipment, documenting its condition, and preventing destruction or removal by unauthorized personnel. Specialized teams from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers and intelligence branches were attached for this purpose. Upon arrival at the site where the E-100 hull was located, British personnel conducted a preliminary inspection. Field reports described a large armored hull resting outdoors, lacking turret and engine. Measurements were taken, and photographs were made. Identification markings were noted. The designation E-100 was recorded in connection with the hull. No attempt had been made to camouflage the vehicle, and there were no signs of recent work. The surrounding area contained other abandoned equipment and workshop debris. Initial assessments classified the hull as an experimental heavy armored vehicle. The absence of a turret and propulsion system was recorded. British technical officers prepared summaries for higher headquarters, noting the vehicle's dimensions, armor thickness, and suspension layout. These summaries were transmitted through established intelligence channels. The reports adhered to standardized formats, listing observed features without speculation. Orders were issued to secure the site and prevent interference. Guards were posted. Local civilians were instructed to remain clear of the area. The hull was examined for demolition charges or sabotage. None were found. The condition of the armor plates was noted as intact, with no evidence of combat damage. Welding seams and bolted joints were inspected and documented. Subsequent instructions from British command authorized further technical examination. Personnel from the Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee were notified. The committee operated under a mandate to collect and evaluate enemy scientific and technical information. Liaison officers coordinated with field units to arrange access. The E-100 hull was included in a list of items designated for detailed study. Engineers conducted more thorough measurements. Suspension components were disassembled in part to observe construction details. Notes were taken on materials and manufacturing methods. The hull interior was inspected to record layout and fittings. No classified documents were found inside the vehicle. The absence of internal equipment limited the scope of inspection. Reports compiled at this stage emphasized the vehicle's unfinished state. They listed missing components and noted that no documentation specific to the hull was recovered on site. References were made to captured German files that mentioned the E-series program. Cross-checking of serial numbers and markings was undertaken to correlate the hull with known records. Based on the collected information, British authorities issued instructions regarding disposition. The hull was identified as suitable for removal to a controlled location for further examination. Arrangements were made to prepare the vehicle for transport. This required partial dismantling due to its size and weight. Engineering units were tasked with assessing transport routes and required equipment. Preparatory work included removal of suspension elements to reduce overall width. Lifting points were reinforced. Temporary supports were installed. The surrounding ground was leveled to permit movement of heavy transport vehicles. Logs and metal plates were laid to distribute weight. Weather conditions and road capacity were taken into account in planning documents. Coordination with transportation units resulted in allocation of heavy trailers and prime movers. Movement orders specified timing and security measures. The hull was to be moved under guard. Documentation accompanying the vehicle included inventory lists, photographs, and technical notes compiled during inspection. Copies were forwarded to intelligence offices. During preparation, British personnel maintained detailed logs of actions taken. These logs recorded dates, personnel involved, and procedures followed. Any alterations to the hull were noted. Care was taken to avoid damage to structural elements. The aim was to preserve the vehicle in its existing condition for examination. Local command reports noted the presence of the hull and ongoing preparations. No interference was reported. The area remained under British control. As work progressed, additional intelligence officers visited the site to observe. Their notes focused on construction techniques and deviations from known German designs. By the time transport preparations were nearing completion, the E-100 hull had been reduced to a configuration suitable for movement. Suspension components removed were tagged and stored for transport alongside the hull. The absence of tracks simplified handling. The hull remained without turret and engine. Further instructions from higher command addressed final disposition after transport. These instructions specified delivery to a secure facility where examination could continue. The purpose stated in orders was technical evaluation. No operational use was authorized. Custody of the hull was assigned to designated units upon arrival at the destination. Throughout these activities, British personnel adhered to established procedures for handling captured material. Documentation emphasized accuracy and preservation of information. All observations were recorded as encountered. No statements were included regarding future application or outcomes. The focus remained on recording the condition and characteristics of the captured vehicle as found and during handling. The movement of the E-100 hull proceeded according to the issued orders. The vehicle was loaded onto transport equipment under supervision. Securing chains and supports were applied. Final inspections confirmed stability for transit. Escort arrangements were confirmed, and departure was scheduled within the authorized time window. At the point of departure from the site, records indicate that all preparatory actions had been completed. The hull, associated components, and documentation were placed under the responsibility of the assigned transport unit. Reports were filed noting the time and condition at departure. The site was then cleared of remaining materials related to the vehicle. The narrative of the E-100 up to this stage remained confined to recorded actions, movements, and observations. All entries in logs, reports, and orders reflected the circumstances as encountered by the personnel involved, without reference beyond the immediate requirements of security, transport, and examination. Following departure from the Paderborn area, the transport carrying the E-100 hull moved under escort along routes designated by British transportation authorities. Movement orders specified reduced speed and avoidance of bridges with insufficient load ratings. Engineering officers accompanied the convoy to monitor structural integrity of the hull and transport equipment. Progress reports were transmitted at scheduled intervals. No incidents were recorded during transit. The destination assigned for the hull was a controlled facility under British military administration, selected for its capacity to accommodate large armoured vehicles and to support technical inspection activities. Upon arrival, the transport unit conducted unloading procedures using heavy lifting equipment. The hull was placed on prepared ground within a secured perimeter. Suspension components and other detached elements were unloaded and stored nearby under inventory control. Custody of the E-100 hull was formally transferred to the receiving unit. Documentation included transport logs, inspection reports from the capture site, photographic records, and technical notes compiled during initial examination. Receiving officers verified the inventory against accompanying lists. Any discrepancies were recorded, none of significance were noted. Security measures at the facility included restricted access, guard postings, and controlled entry points. Notices were issued to personnel regarding handling of captured enemy equipment. The E-100 hull was assigned an internal reference number for tracking within British records. Signage identifying the object as captured enemy material was placed according to regulations. Technical examination resumed under supervision of officers with experience in armored vehicle design and maintenance. Work orders authorized non-destructive inspection only. Cutting, drilling, or modification of structural elements was not permitted without additional authorization. Examination teams included mechanical engineers, metallurgists, and ordnance specialists. Measurements of armor plate thickness were confirmed using calibrated instruments. Plate angles and weld configurations were recorded. Notes described the quality and consistency of welding seams, including bead width and penetration. Bolt sizes and thread types were catalogued. The hull floor and roof plates were examined for reinforcement features. The suspension system components removed prior to transport were reassembled for inspection. Coil springs were measured for diameter, length, and wire thickness. Bogie assemblies were examined to document bearing types and lubrication arrangements. Fastening methods to the hull were recorded. Observations were entered into standardized forms used for captured equipment analysis. Interior inspection focused on layout and intended mounting points. Openings for engine installation, transmission linkage, and crew access were documented. The absence of installed systems was noted. Mounting brackets and internal frames were measured to infer intended component placement. No wiring or hydraulic lines were present. Hull apertures for armament installation were examined. The turret ring diameter was measured and compared against known German turret dimensions. Notes recorded machining quality and surface finish. No turret race components were installed. Cover plates present during capture had been removed prior to transport and were stored with other components. Reports compiled during this phase were forwarded through technical intelligence channels. Distribution lists included armored development sections and ordnance evaluation offices. Reports adhered to descriptive formats, listing observations without conclusions beyond immediate technical characteristics. Any uncertainties were marked as such. Parallel to physical examination, British intelligence units reviewed captured German documents relating to armored vehicle development. Files recovered from various locations referenced the E-series program. These files were catalogued and cross-referenced. Mentions of the E-100 designation were extracted and compiled. Dates, issuing offices, and document numbers were recorded. Document analysis identified production responsibility assignments, material requests, and correspondence regarding priority levels. References to Adler work and related subcontractors were noted. No complete set of plans specific to the captured hull was located. Partial drawings and specification sheets were found among other materials and associated tentatively with the project. Information from documents was compared with observations from the hull. Where dimensions or features corresponded, cross-references were noted. Where discrepancies appeared, they were recorded without resolution. The process focused on matching recorded intentions with observed construction where possible. Administrative correspondence addressed the future handling of the E-100 hull. Memoranda circulated among British offices discussed storage duration, continued examination, and reporting requirements. No directives authorized disposal or scrapping at this stage. The hull remained under controlled storage between examination sessions. During this period, other captured German armored vehicles and components were present at the same facility. Examination schedules were coordinated to allocate personnel and equipment. The E-100 hull was included among items requiring extended study due to its size and configuration. Maintenance personnel were assigned to prevent deterioration of the hull during storage. Protective coatings were applied to exposed metal surfaces where required. Drainage arrangements were checked to prevent water accumulation. These actions were recorded as preservation measures. Periodic inspections were conducted to verify condition. Inspection logs noted absence of corrosion progression and structural changes. Any movement of the hull within the facility was documented. Access logs recorded personnel entries for examination purposes. As British forces consolidated control over additional regions, further technical material was delivered to the facility. Intelligence summaries were updated to reflect newly available information. References to heavy armored vehicle projects were incorporated into broader compilations. Within this context, questions arose regarding allocation of examination responsibilities among Allied authorities. Liaison communications took place between British and other Allied technical teams. These communications addressed access to captured equipment and sharing of documentation. Agreements were recorded in memoranda specifying inspection schedules and reporting protocols. The E-100 hull remained primarily under British custody. Requests from other Allied units for inspection access were logged and approved on a case-by-case basis. Visits were supervised, and observations made by visiting personnel were required to be submitted in written form. Technical drawings were prepared by British engineers to document the hull as found. These drawings included elevations, cross-sections, and component details. Drafts were reviewed for accuracy and archived. Photographic records supplemented drawings, showing details not easily captured in line work. Material samples were not removed from the hull during this phase. Metallurgical analysis relied on surface examination and reference to captured German specifications. Any proposal to extract samples required higher authorization and was deferred. Reports generated during examination were collated into files labeled under captured enemy equipment categories. Filing systems ensured traceability of observations to specific dates and personnel. Index cards summarized key features for quick reference. Logistical considerations regarding long-term storage were addressed. Space allocation within the facility was reviewed. The hull's footprint and weight influenced placement decisions. Movement plans within the facility were prepared but not executed beyond minor repositioning. Throughout these activities, communication emphasized adherence to procedure and documentation standards. Instructions reminded personnel to avoid speculative statements. Observations were to be limited to what could be directly verified. The operational environment at the facility reflected ongoing demobilization and reorganization following cessation of hostilities in the region. Units were reassigned, and personnel turnover occurred. Handover notes ensured continuity of knowledge regarding the E-100 hull among incoming staff. As new personnel assumed responsibilities, briefings included summaries of the hull's capture, transport, and examination status. These briefings relied on existing documentation. No reinterpretation of findings was introduced. Administrative files recorded expenditure of resources associated with examination activities. Man-hours, equipment usage, and materials for preservation were logged. These records were used for internal accounting purposes. At intervals, higher command requested status updates on captured experimental equipment. Responses regarding the E-100 hull summarized its condition, location, and examination progress. These summaries followed prescribed formats and avoided evaluative language. By the end of this phase, the E-100 hull remained intact, secured, and documented. Examination activities continued according to schedules determined by technical staff availability and administrative priorities. All recorded actions reflected immediate requirements for custody, inspection, and preservation as they arose. As examination activities proceeded, British administrative authorities issued revised directives concerning the consolidation of captured enemy armored equipment. These directives were distributed through military channels and specified centralized handling of selected items for efficiency of documentation and control. The E-100 hull was listed among the items to remain at its current facility pending further instruction. No changes to custody arrangements were ordered. Technical personnel continued detailed recording of structural features. Attention was given to weld patterns along the hull sides and roof. Engineers documented variations in weld bead consistency between different sections, noting transitions between rolled plate joints and reinforced areas around apertures. Measurements were entered into inspection forms using standardized terminology consistent with British engineering documentation of the period. Fastening methods used in suspension mounting points were examined in detail. Bolt grades were identified through head markings where visible. Thread pitch measurements were taken. Where access permitted, torque markings and washer types were recorded. These observations were logged without inference regarding manufacturing origin beyond identification of observed characteristics. The hull underside was inspected for evidence of mine protection features or structural reinforcement. Plate thickness was measured at accessible points. Drainage openings and inspection ports were documented. No protective coatings beyond standard primer were observed on interior surfaces. Interior structural ribs and frames were measured to determine spacing and intended load distribution. Mounting points for crew seating, ammunition storage, and internal equipment were identified based on bracket placement and bolt holes. These were sketched and annotated in technical notebooks. No fittings were installed at these locations. The engine compartment opening was examined for intended powerplant accommodation. Dimensions suggested allowance for a large displacement engine. Mounting rails and attachment points were measured. Ventilation openings and exhaust routing paths were identified based on cutouts and welded guides. No exhaust components were present. Transmission tunnel openings were documented. Coupling points for drive shafts were identified through inspection of machined surfaces. Gearbox mounting flanges were absent, indicating that installation had not progressed to that stage. Notes reflected only observed absence and configuration. Attention was also given to the hull front glacis. Plate angles were measured using inclinometers. Vision port openings were documented, including thickness of armored covers and mounting methods. No optical equipment was installed. Apertures were closed with temporary plates or left open, as found during inspection. External fittings such as towing lugs, lifting eyes, and attachment points for tools were catalogued. Their placement was recorded in relation to hull reference points. Weld quality around these fittings was documented. No external stowage equipment was mounted. Paint remnants were examined. The hull exterior showed traces of primer and base coating in limited areas. Color identification was recorded using available reference charts. No camouflage pattern was discernible. Surface where indicated exposure to weather rather than operational use. Parallel to physical inspection, administrative review of captured German industrial correspondence continued. British document teams processed files obtained from armaments offices and factories. References to experimental vehicle programs were indexed. Entries mentioning E-100 or associated weight classes were compiled into summary sheets. Some documents referred to standardized component approaches within the E-series. These references listed suspension concepts and production rationales. Dates and distribution lists were noted. Where authorship could be identified, names and positions were recorded. No directives indicating completion timelines for the E-100 were found. Production priority lists recovered from German sources placed experimental heavy vehicles below operational production. These lists were transcribed and translated. Marginal notes and amendments were recorded. The absence of later revisions affecting the E-100 was noted without interpretation. British analysts compared factory correspondence with material allocation records. Steel allotments, machine time requests, and labor assignments were tabulated. Entries associated with the E-100 project were minimal compared to serial production vehicles. These figures were recorded as presented in the documents. Transportation logs from German sources were reviewed. No records indicated movement of completed E-100 components beyond the hull. This absence was noted in document summaries. Analysts recorded document gaps where expected records were not found. The hull itself was periodically re-examined to verify that no deterioration occurred. Protective measures were adjusted as required. Any application of preservatives was documented, including material type and date applied. Environmental conditions within the storage area were monitored. As Allied coordination continued, British authorities received inquiries regarding access to captured experimental vehicles. Formal requests were submitted through liaison channels. The E-100 hull was included in lists of equipment available for supervised inspection. Scheduling arrangements were made accordingly. Visiting technical officers from other Allied forces conducted inspections under supervision. Their activities were logged. Notes taken by visiting personnel were submitted to British custodians. These notes were filed with existing documentation without modification. No removal of components was authorized during these visits. All observations remained non-invasive. Any proposals for further testing were deferred pending higher-level decisions. Correspondence reflecting these deferrals was archived. Administrative memoranda addressed space management within the facility. As additional equipment arrived, reorganization plans were drafted. The E-100 hull's location was adjusted slightly to accommodate movement corridors. This relocation within the facility was documented, including date and personnel involved. Engineering staff prepared additional scaled drawings to reflect updated positioning and any newly observed details. Revisions to earlier drawings were marked and dated. Archival procedures ensured previous versions remained accessible. Throughout this period, British reporting maintained consistent format. Weekly summaries included brief status notes on the E-100 hull. These notes reiterated condition, security status, and examination progress. No evaluative statements were included. Personnel changes continued as units were reassigned. Outgoing officers prepared handover documents summarizing ongoing tasks. Incoming officers acknowledged receipt and continued established procedures. No changes in examination scope were introduced during these transitions. Budgetary records associated with the facility reflected ongoing maintenance and staffing costs. The E-100 hull was listed among items requiring above-average space allocation. These records were internal and used for administrative planning. By mid-period, examination activity slowed as immediate documentation objectives were met. The hull remained under observation. Occasional inspections verified stability. No new features were uncovered during this interval. Communications from higher headquarters requested confirmation of inventory completeness. Responses confirmed that all known components associated with the E-100 hull were accounted for. No additional parts were reported missing beyond those never installed. As demobilization progressed, discussions arose within administrative channels regarding long-term disposition of captured equipment. Preliminary lists categorized items for retention, transfer, or disposal. The E-100 hull was listed without final disposition. This listing reflected administrative status only. No instructions were issued to alter handling of the hull at this stage. Custodial responsibility remained unchanged. Documentation continued to accumulate in accordance with established procedures. At the close of this phase, records reflected a stabilized situation. The E-100 hull remained secured, documented, and preserved. All actions taken during this period were recorded contemporaneously, adhering to operational and technical documentation standards in effect at the time. Subsequent administrative correspondence addressed the redistribution of captured material among Allied technical centers. These communications outlined criteria based on category, size, and examination status. The E-100 hull was referenced in lists circulated between British administrative offices and higher command. The item was marked as requiring special handling due to dimensions and incomplete configuration. No immediate relocation was ordered. Engineering staff continued to maintain the hull in storage condition. Periodic inspections checked for deformation, corrosion, and integrity of lifting points. Inspection reports noted stable condition. Any minor surface oxidation was addressed with approved preservatives. Records included dates, materials used, and personnel responsible. As facilities underwent reorganization, inventories were reconciled. The E-100 hull inventory entry included cross-references to all associated documentation. Indexing systems ensured linkage between physical object, photographs, drawings, and reports. Clerical staff updated registers to reflect current location within the facility. At the same time, British technical intelligence units compiled consolidated summaries of German experimental armored vehicle projects. These summaries drew from multiple captured sources. The E-100 was included as an entry with descriptive data derived from physical inspection and document review. Summaries were circulated internally under restricted distribution. Requests for clarification regarding certain construction features were transmitted to document analysis teams. These teams reviewed additional German files recovered from other locations. Where references to suspension design or hull construction appeared relevant, excerpts were forwarded to engineering staff. Notes indicated alignment or divergence with observed features. Transportation officers conducted assessments of long-term storage logistics. Given the hull's weight and footprint, plans were drafted for potential future movement. These plans identified required equipment, personnel, and route considerations. The plans remained contingency documents and were not executed at this stage. During this period, Allied authorities reviewed policies regarding sharing of captured technology information. Memoranda outlined procedures for controlled dissemination among Allied partners. The E-100 hull documentation was categorized accordingly. Access permissions were defined by rank and assignment. Inspection teams from Allied nations continued to visit under supervision. Each visit was logged with date, duration, and scope. Visiting personnel were briefed on handling restrictions. Observations recorded by visitors were appended to the central file. No destructive testing was authorized. Proposals for metallurgical sampling or load testing were deferred. Correspondence documenting these proposals and deferrals was archived. The hull remained unchanged physically. Environmental monitoring within the storage area recorded temperature and humidity levels. Adjustments were made as necessary to minimize deterioration. These adjustments were documented as routine facility management actions. Administrative attention turned to consolidation of photographic archives. Images of the E-100 hull taken at capture, during transport, and during examination were catalogued. Negative storage conditions were checked. Index sheets listed image content and date. As part of routine reporting, facility commanders submitted monthly summaries to higher headquarters. These summaries included a brief line on the status of the E-100 hull. Wording remained factual, noting custody and condition. Personnel assigned to the facility received updated instructions emphasizing documentation discipline. These instructions reiterated the requirement to record observations accurately and to avoid inference. Compliance was monitored through report review. In parallel, British military authorities addressed disposition of other captured armored vehicles. Some items were approved for scrapping after documentation. Others were allocated for training or reference. The E-100 hull remained pending decision, listed separately due to its experimental nature and incomplete state. Records show that space constraints increased as additional material arrived. Facility layout plans were revised. The E-100 hull was moved slightly within the storage area to optimize access. This movement was supervised and documented. No damage occurred. Following relocation, engineers rechecked alignment and support. Supports were adjusted to ensure even load distribution. Notes recorded these adjustments. The hull remained without tracks or power components. Correspondence from ordnance offices requested confirmation of whether any armament components associated with the E-100 had been recovered elsewhere. Searches of inventories and document files did not identify such components. Responses stated this absence as recorded. As administrative workloads shifted, some technical staff were reassigned. Remaining personnel maintained oversight of the hull. Knowledge transfer was handled through written handover notes and briefings based on existing documentation. Periodic audits reviewed compliance with security regulations. The E-100 hull storage complied with requirements. Audit reports included checklists and sign-offs. Toward the latter part of this phase, British authorities revisited plans for centralized storage of large captured vehicles. Discussions included potential consolidation at fewer sites. The E-100 hull was included in planning tables. No execution orders followed immediately. Document management continued. Translations of German documents referencing heavy vehicle programs were reviewed for accuracy. Amendments were issued where translation clarifications were required. Revised translations were filed with originals. The hull itself remained unchanged. No new examinations revealed additional features beyond those already recorded. Inspection frequency decreased to routine intervals. As personnel prepared periodic summaries, emphasis remained on current status. Reports avoided reference to broader implications or future use. They focused on custody, condition, and documentation completeness. By the end of this stage, the E-100 hull continued to be held under British control, preserved and recorded. Administrative processes governing its handling remained active but unchanged. All actions during this period were documented contemporaneously, reflecting operational requirements and established procedures. In the subsequent administrative period, directives were issued concerning the gradual reduction of temporary storage facilities established during active operations. These directives originated from higher command levels and outlined timelines for consolidation, transfer, or disposal of captured enemy equipment. Implementation was delegated to regional commands with responsibility for technical material. The E-100 hull was listed among items requiring individual assessment prior to any action. British ordnance and technical branches exchanged memoranda to determine appropriate handling. These memoranda referenced existing documentation completeness, physical condition, and logistical considerations. The hull's incomplete state and lack of associated powertrain or armament were recorded as factual attributes influencing handling requirements. No decision was recorded during initial exchanges. As part of consolidation planning, surveys were conducted to identify facilities capable of long-term storage or further examination of large armored hulls. Survey reports listed available infrastructure, lifting capacity, and security arrangements. The E-100 hull was included in comparative tables alongside other captured vehicles. These tables contained measurements, weights, and handling notes derived from earlier documentation. Transportation officers updated contingency movement plans. Route assessments were revised to reflect changes in infrastructure conditions. Bridge load ratings and road surface conditions were rechecked. These plans remained preparatory documents. No movement order was issued at this stage. Administrative files show continued reconciliation of inventories as personnel rotations occurred. Responsibility for the E-100 hull was formally transferred between officers through signed handover documents. Each transfer referenced existing records and confirmed physical condition at the time of handover. Routine inspections continued at reduced frequency. Logs indicate inspections focused on structural integrity and environmental effects. Protective measures applied earlier remained effective. No structural changes were observed. As part of wider Allied coordination, discussions took place regarding allocation of captured German equipment for evaluation by different national authorities. Meeting minutes recorded topics discussed and items referenced. The E-100 hull was mentioned by designation, with notes indicating its location and documentation status. No allocation decision was recorded in these minutes. Further review of German archival material yielded no additional documentation specific to completion or operational testing of the E-100. Analysts recorded this absence in summary sheets. These summaries were appended to existing files without commentary. Budgetary reviews addressed costs associated with continued storage. The E-100 hull was listed as requiring significant space and handling resources. These reviews were administrative in nature and did not mandate action. As facilities prepared for eventual closure or repurposing, updated disposition lists were compiled. Items were categorized by type and status. The E-100 hull appeared under experimental armored vehicles with disposition marked as pending. This status was carried forward in subsequent revisions. Communication with engineering staff emphasized readiness to support movement or transfer if ordered. Equipment availability and personnel rosters were updated accordingly. No execution followed these preparations. Toward the later part of the period, Higher Command issued instructions to finalize disposition plans for remaining captured equipment. These instructions required confirmation of documentation completeness and physical inspection prior to any transfer or disposal. Compliance checklists were distributed. Officers responsible for the E-100 hull completed required checklists. Documentation completeness was confirmed. Physical inspection verified condition unchanged. Reports were submitted through command channels. Following submission, orders were issued authorizing transfer of selected captured vehicles to centralized locations for final handling. The E-100 hull was included in an annex specifying large experimental vehicles. The order outlined responsibilities for preparation and movement. Engineering and transport units reviewed the order and prepared detailed movement plans. Previous contingency plans were updated and activated. Required equipment was allocated. Timelines were established according to operational constraints. Preparatory actions mirrored earlier procedures. Lifting points were rechecked. Supports were adjusted. Associated components stored separately were inventoried and prepared for movement alongside the hull. Documentation packages were assembled. Security arrangements were coordinated. Escort requirements were specified. Movement orders included routing instructions and reporting checkpoints. All actions were logged. The hull was moved from its storage position to the loading area within the facility. This movement was supervised and documented. No damage was recorded. Loading onto transport equipment followed established procedures. Upon completion of loading, final inspections confirmed stability. Escort units acknowledged readiness. Departure time was recorded. Responsibility for custody transferred to the designated transport unit at the moment of departure, as noted in logs. Subsequent reports from the transport unit confirmed movement according to plan. Arrival at the designated centralized location was recorded. Unloading procedures were carried out under supervision. Custody was transferred to receiving authorities, with documentation verified. At the receiving location, the E-100 hull was placed in controlled storage. Inventory registers were updated. Associated documentation was integrated into local archives. Responsibility for further handling passed to the receiving command. Final reports from the originating facility closed the file on the E-100 hull, noting transfer completion and removal from local inventory. These reports referenced order numbers, dates, and receiving authority identifiers. From that point, records at the originating facility contained no further entries regarding the hull beyond archival references. All actions taken were documented at the time, reflecting administrative, technical, and logistical procedures as they occurred, without additional commentary or interpretation.